this is a freaking dragon that's gonna be chasing you while you're on the back of a horse. Oh my god.
Success! The plan went
Look,
off without a
he's
hitch.
doing it! So the other day I did a reaction video to SCP-096, which was a really cool animation and story, and honestly I had never looked into SCP stuff before now, and you guys kind of went crazy on it. There was a lot of people that requested that I cover more SCP content, so I started checking out more animations, and I found a channel called SCP Animated, Tales from the Foundation, and they've got some really awesome animations, and we're going to cover SCP-682. Now, I've got a little backstory for this. Well, something from the actual Foundation's website, and I'll tell you about it. So the description of this thing is a very large, vaguely reptile creature from unknown origin. It appears to be extremely intelligent and was observed to engage in complex communication with SCP-079 during some exposure time that they had together. It appears to have a hatred of all life, which has been expressed in several interviews during containment. So apparently it can speak and stuff. So we're gonna cover this in the reaction a little bit later, but I've got some backstory to exactly what this creature is all about, in my experience at least. Do me a favor and head over to SCP Animated Tales from the Foundation's channel. Click subscribe there, click the notification bell, and if you like reaction videos like this, click subscribe on this video as well. Let's get into the animation.
May 14th, 1883.
1883.
I received a most curious missive in the post this morning. It has been 4 months since I returned to England, having nearly lost my life in endeavoring to become the first man to reach the summit of the foreboding and deadly Mount Everest.
Dang.
I have spent the time since in research and recovery here in London, nursing my wounds and documenting my memoirs of the harrowing trip up the mountain and my nearly fatal encounter with the creature I found there. And have not planned to embark again for distant shores until after summer has passed. That has changed, I fear, as the result of today's letter.
All right.
Hello, Theodore Thomas Blackwood, CBE. Colonel Joseph Deafante, Armée de Terre of the Republic of France, does hereby cordially invite you to participate in the hunt of a great and terrible creature that threatens the lives of thousands.
So, getting into hunting, normally hunters take these things as challenges, and they love to give hunting stories. So, this guy went to the summit of Mount Everest and faced something before that has wounded him, and he's still considering going hunting for great beasts again. That's the true spirit of a hunter, bruh.
The Tarasque, a creature great and terrifying, of late believed to be legend, has risen and threatens the security of the land of Provence and France itself. Colonel Deafante has been authorized by the President of the Republic to pay a sum of 5 million English pounds to the man or men who shall slay this infamous beast.
So 5 million pounds, more than $5 million, to hunt down and slay a Tarasque. So let me tell you about a Tarasque, or what I know of it. I've seen several renditions of this creature before. In some of the games that I've played, it's been smaller creatures that, well, in one of the Ark mods that I played actually, it was a smaller creature that did not do justice to what I had learned about Tarasque before. The first I ever heard about this monster was in the Monsters Compendium for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We used to flip through this thing and just look at different monsters, and I remember the Tarasque as one of the strongest creatures in that entire book. This thing was incredible. Needless to say, this is going to be a very interesting story.
I immediately dashed off in acceptance and sent it out with the afternoon post.
5 million,
I've always
let's
been a
do
firm
it.
believer in the proposition that even in the most preposterous of myths, there lies a kernel of truth.
Okay.
Whether an ancient behemoth that breathed fire was bringing ruination to the south of France, I knew not. But I knew that the army and the president themselves were concerned enough to seek out a man such as myself, and were willing to offer a bounty that would finance a score of proper expeditions for the killing of a single beast.
And I mean, if the president calls...
May 20th, 1883.
They gotta be worried for something.
We disembarked in Avignon. Mr. Roosevelt and I spent many hours sharing our tales of adventure. I find in him a true intellectual who understands what it means to be a naturalist. Mr. Dukov I found more difficult to talk to. He is a private man who prefers the company of his books and his studies to that of his fellows.
Okay.
I did my best to avoid speaking to Mr. Harris during the trip. I intend during our expedition to be no less than a gentleman, but the man leaves a sour taste in my mouth.
Oh.
May 21st, 1883.
Okay.
Avignon itself looked like a city at war. Soldiers patrolling the streets, barricades at the edge of town. Not far outside the city, we reached the edge of the quarantine zone. Soldiers had been hard at work digging trenches, erecting fortifications. The young men keeping watch looked battle-scarred, as though they had seen indescribable horror.
All this to protect against a creature. So, in this day and age, can you imagine? I mean, we've seen military, build up at cities to prevent against all sorts of things, right? But can you imagine if this was in preparation for a monster? It's so crazy to think about.
I asked on passing if any of them had yet seen the Tarasque. Only a few. The scouts and lookouts had seen it from a distance, I was told, for nobody who had engaged the beast at close range was still alive.
Right.
We set up camp on the edge of the dead town. Mr. Harris returned by evening and informed us he had spotted the Tarasque to the southwest, near the village of Bellegarde, in the act of destroying a farmhouse. Its route, he said, had not been difficult to trace, for a swath of barren land seemed to lay a trail. Even the grass itself was not safe from the Tarasque's wrath.
Wow.
Tomorrow we will follow the trail and engage the beast. May 22nd, 1883.
Be careful what you wish for, boy.
Shortly after midday, we spotted the creature in the distance. It was stationary, seeming to nap in the afternoon sun. It was a massive thing, longer than a whale and taller than a giraffe, and it looked to outweigh either. Its scales glistened in the sun,
like
and its
a
teeth,
dragon.
massive and shining, were bad as it rested among the chaos it had wrought. Had it wings, I would have called it a dragon. With our weapons in tow, we stealthily approached the beast to a range of less than 30 meters. We drew straws, and it was agreed I would take the first shot at the abomination. Steadying my gun against the fence, I took careful aim for the sleeping Tarasque's head. I held my breath, made my final adjustment, and fired. We watched with delight as the top of the Tarasque's head was shorn clean off.
Wow!
The beast slumped to the ground, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Mr. Harris let out a cheer, and the dead beast came to life. Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Harris barely had time to fire a round each at the beast before we were forced to scatter. We watched in horror as the wounds it took sealed themselves within seconds. We were able to elude the Goliath, and by nightfall, we were among the soldiers at the barricade.
That was one of the things that was listed in the monster compendium, that this thing can regenerate. Awesome, man.
Pride's injured, but otherwise in good health. May 28th, 1883. After our second attempt to attack the Tarasque on the 23rd proved no more successful than the first, we have come to a conclusion that the beast cannot be killed simply by gunshot, or electrification, or setting it aflame, for the rate at which it heals its injuries is so great, and its tolerance for pain and mutilation so high, that even the mighty broadsides of the Royal Navy would have little chance of destroying it before it could take their lives in trade. To slay the Tarasque, we determined, we would have to immobilize it, and deal such destruction upon it that it would be utterly annihilated before it could free itself.
Wow.
We prepared our trap in the fields near Gravesend, a village between Tarasque and Avignon that the Tarasque had yet to lay waste to. We had judged that the beast stood about 9 feet at the shoulder, 6 feet wide and 30 feet long. We dug a long trench in the field wide and long enough to contain the beast, and deep enough to stop the beast climbing loose before the damage could be done. In the bottom of the pit, we mounted steel rods, sharpened to a fine point by the hundreds, each tipped with the noxious poison I had acquired in the Orient. Mr. Roosevelt has agreed to act as bait. He will approach the Tarasque on horseback and attack it with his elephant gun. Once it gives chase, he will lure it to the pit. Providence withstanding, nothing shall be left of the creature but ash and bone by sundown tomorrow.
Dang.
May 29th, 1883.
Can you imagine? So the reward is $5 million. Would you ask for more to be bait? This is not Shaggy and Scooby type ghost stuff. This is a freaking dragon that's gonna be chasing you while you're on the back of a horse. Oh my god.
Success! The plan went
Look,
off without a
he's
hitch.
doing it!
It was afternoon before Mr. Roosevelt could coerce the Tarasque into pursuing him. But surely enough, the reptilian behemoth fell into the pit, impaled upon the spikes.
Wow.
Messrs. Dukov, Harris, and I, lying in wait out of sight, joined Mr. Roosevelt at the pit's edge and unleashed the full fury of our armaments onto it. our rifles and shotguns, the particle destabilizer, Mr. Dukov's electric rifle, and the pitch-blende gun. The monster let loose a screech from the pits of damnation itself, as bullets and explosives tore its flesh loose, bit by bit, and gelid kerosene burned slowly and stopped it regrowing. By the time the fires had died down, a charred skeleton was all that remained. We have separated the beast's massive skull, blackened and perforated, from what remains of the monster, and a handful of soldiers are hard at work, filling in the pit with earth. Tomorrow we shall bring the skull back to Avignon and collect our reward. May 30th, 1883.
What do you think?
We were hailed as heroes by the army when we arrived in Avignon with our prize. In the morning light, the Tarasque skull seemed whiter than it had the night before, and more charred flesh stuck to it than it had seemed when we dragged it from the pit, though surely it was little more than an illusion. The four of us posed for photographs, and Mr. Dukov asked to have his photograph taken with his head in between the massive jaws of our fallen prey.
Uh-huh.
Imagine our horror when the jaws snapped shut, severing Dukov's head neatly at the shoulders.
I knew
the
it!
skull of the Tarasque rolled loose from its place on the stage and snapped again, taking another chunk of his body. And the soldier screamed and fainted as it seemed to be growing a new coating of flesh and scales over its charred exterior. We watched, shocked, as the honor guards fired a volley at the skull. The chips it took off seemed to replace themselves instantly, and I was dumbfounded as sinew and muscles seemed to spread across the creature's bones and knit into shape. The jaws of the disembodied Tarasque opened, and it shouted in French.
What?
The rest of the Tarasque, covered in earth and grime, held together by a few lonely strands of muscle, lurched through the square with uncanny speed, trampling men in its path, ignoring gunshot and cannon fire as it made to rejoin its head. Mr. Roosevelt and I had no desire to see what happened next. We retreated into the vault as a blinding light filled the square, and a blistering wind, mightier than the hurricanes of the Caribbean, slammed the door shut and sealed us within.
As good as new.
June 13th,
Lord, now they
1883.
trapped.
Providence smiled upon us after all in the end. On the morning of the 1st, the vault door opened and I regarded a major of the army and a company of men searching for survivors. At least 10,000 were incinerated when Avignon was consumed by flame. Even those who had survived, I learned, had been burned or blinded, and pitch-blende fever will likely claim many of them in time. Dang. We were two of only a handful of witnesses to one of the greatest disasters to strike France in recent memory, and having been at the center of it all, the army regarded us with great suspicion.
What?
Mr. Roosevelt and I parted ways in Calais. He intends to return to America, he informed me, and pursue a political career. In that, I wish him well. I returned to my house in London this afternoon and was informed by Deeds that a postcard had arrived for me this morning. The handwriting in the brief unsigned note within resembled that of the strange Englishman who had attended the questionings, whose notes I caught brief glimpses of from time to time. I present that message below.
To Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, CBE. The Royal Foundation for the Security, Containment, and Protection of Anomalous Objects and Phantasmagoria requests a meeting for the purpose of negotiating an alliance favorable to both our parties.
Whoa.
Please call anytime, excepting Sundays, at number 19 Melbourne Road, Westminster, and ask to speak to Dr. Thursday. Your discretion is requested in this matter.
Wow.
I have not heard of this foundation before, and I do not know if I intend to take them up on their mysterious overture. Perhaps I shall hear them out, but I have never been one to serve in one man's employ for very long, and I value my freedom as a naturalist and explorer above all else. We shall see.
Dang, man. I gotta say, guys, this Tarasque, oh my god. How do you kill something that regenerates like that? Can you imagine if something like that was truly on Earth? What would we do? Would we all become its prey sooner or later? Good Lord, man. Just to think about that. Some of these creations that have been been come up with, like the Tarasque and stuff over time, just incredible amounts of imagination and detail into these things, and I really love hearing about them. Aside from that, the quality of this animation and the story is incredible, right? Man, that was a great story. Guys, make sure to head over to the Foundation channel, click subscribe, click the notification bell, click subscribe on this video if you like reaction videos like this, and we'll be doing more from this channel to come. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope y'all really enjoyed it. This is Zueljin signing off, and we'll see you next time.